You're watching Act.tv. I'm Juliana Forlano. Coming up on our interview segment, John Pavlovitz, blogger, author, pastor. His blog is Stuff That Needs to Be Said, and it has like more than 100 million views. He has a new book out, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, where he talks about the bedrock ideas of our religions. And he helps us take an honest look at how the beliefs we hold shape our relationships, both to God and to our fellow humans, and to make sure that love has the loudest word. Why do we have him on today? Because I was asking what happened to the religious left. The religious right is all over the news. It's very easy to fearmonger about what they're doing. It's easy to be shocked. So, of course, news media covers what they're doing all the time. Occasionally, as we cover actions in the field, we see the religious left showing up. We see pastors, we see people of the cloth, rabbis, etc., everybody coming to support actions that they care about, but you don't see it breaking over into the mainstream of media. So we're going to talk about what is happening with the religious left with our guest coming up right now. John, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's just so good to be with you, Juliana. Thanks for the invitation.
I asked my friend, I said, friend, what happened to the religious left? These are the good friends that you can ask real questions. And she said, go call John. I'm like, oh, where did I go? I guess I missed something. But your book is amazing, and it's out right now, by the way, the book, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. I just have so many. So let's just jump right in. My last segment was about the environment. So many people find and commune with their sense of the divine in nature, and yet we are plowing it down at an incredible rate. And to me, not taking care of our, God-given natural environment is akin to killing the divine. Do you have any questions around this any comments around this subject of what is happening with our environment and how it's connected to religious thoughts and dogmas?
Well, I think what you see is it's another example of the cognitive dissonance of people on the right who claim faith in a God of love who cares for the planet, a God who so loved the world, and yet they seem to have a disregard for everything provided to them. And it's really one of those things that you can look at from the outside and not understand the disconnect. But for the people who are inside of it, it doesn't even occur to them to treasure what God made because they're so focused on the afterlife that it's inconsequential at times what happens here, which of course people on the left, and whether they're religious or not, realize how ridiculous that is.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that. It gets me right into, another question about the effect that the concept of having an afterlife has on people on the left's ability to forgive. It seems like there's a lot of tyranny on the march in different areas, and yet the people who are being tyrannized are being called on to forgive. Let's talk about that concept. There's a connection to me between having this concept of an afterlife, and why should I forgive? If God's going to do the forgiving and the punishing, why do I need to do it? Maybe it makes it easier for me to forgive if I think this guy's going to get what he deserves when he meets his maker. Let's dive into that.
Well, these are all ideas that are really easy to weaponize, and the religious right weaponizes that idea because the left is supposed to be tolerant, which really translates into we're supposed to abide cruelty and inhumanity and injustice. But the truth is, Jesus, who comes on in my faith tradition, is the teachings of Jesus, and Jesus was very much present. He was in the streets, he was with people, he was fighting all of these systemic ills, and yet he was also had his eyes toward another life. But people on the left who are spiritual, they understand that there is a sacredness to this experience that we have and to people here on the ground. And we're not just waiting to get to a better place. We're trying to bring heaven down. We're trying to make that experience happen here for more people.
That's very interesting and very disturbing. I think, do they have the numbers? I mean, it seems like you see these mega churches, you see, the rise of these pastors. The internet has blown prosperity gospel, which is, has
Yeah.
its problems too, all over the place. What happened to like the Saint Rose, is it, of the Little Flower? Saint Therese of the Little Flower. This
Yeah.
this tangible idea of, as you said, valuing things that we have here now.
Well, I think what you see is the religious right, they're getting attention, and the people on the left who are more moderate, they're often leaving organized religion. So they're not necessarily being counted on Sundays. But as you said in the intro, that many people, 100 million people reading my blog, it's not a validation of my writing. It's a confirmation that people are asking these questions and feeling these prompts, and so people who are more moderate are moving out of organized church, but they're still doing all that work. It's just difficult to measure them or to have some sort of shared expression that cuts through the media. So you will see those incendiary pastors, and you won't see the beautiful stuff that's happening in our community because it doesn't trend.
Hmm. Isn't that the truth? Well, here we are. I'm hoping to help it trend.
That's right.
Um, how can we get it to be okay to be spiritual on the left again? It seems like
Mm,
we don't talk about it in our politics. I feel like we have the moral authority, kind of. We're like doing the sharing, and yet somehow, we're willing to share. That's like the base of it. And
yeah.
somehow it's not okay to talk about God. It's not okay to talk. I mean, if is this is this something we've been painted with? Well, we're the party of science, so we can't talk about a higher power.
I think the right has been so good for decades. They've had a head start on how to organize and how to take the megaphone and get the attention. And also, by nature, progressive spirituality, people who have a progressive spirituality, they're not going to thrust their spirituality on other people. So they're not about power or control, and that's a very different energy. So our energy is usually about empathy, and it's usually about generosity. But again, those things are hard to rally people around for some reason, and it's that we have to make caring for people newsworthy again. We have to make that the norm rather than this ugly, cruel thing that we see in the right.
I think as I've aged and I am aware that people, there are people who are voters now who were infants when 9/11 happened. You know,
Yeah.
um, I think people are stepping in to this system where the left says, we don't do God stuff. We don't do that
Mm.
in this political party. And I'm wondering if you see kind of a way out of that, of an ability to both. Like, I feel like I'm doing that with this show because I'm like, okay, people, we are going to do this. This is a show.
Yes.
We usually cover activism, people in the streets. Occasionally you'll have pastors and preachers in the streets with the people. I mean, often
Hmm.
actually, and they will speak with the people. But at the same time, there seems to be this, especially, there just seems to be this, that's not what we do. And I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you have thoughts on how we can break through that.
Well, I believe that the people who read my writing, for example, they're a really disparate group. Politically, theologically, there's atheists, agnostics, Christians, Muslims, and the beauty of that is that interfaith collaborative community is possible, but we need to do more with that so that it's visible, to give people an alternative. We know the worst of religion. We know the fear and the prejudice and the misogyny and the hatred that it's bred, but there is another side of it. There is this redemptive idea of loving our neighbor. And so I think I call it the community of the convinced.
Mm.
Those people who all believe that compassion is the better path, whether they're people of faith or not, they have to partner more so that there is a concrete example to people who are sitting there saying there's no place for me in organized religion. There is. You just don't get to see it that often.
I don't know. Some organized religions, which I won't name, what's happening above the sort of congregational level is so distasteful and
Mm,
disgusting that it's very hard to stay as part of the organization without diving down, as I've seen many people do, which I won't also name names on that, um, uh, without just an immense amount of denial. And the organizations themselves, I'm talking about the Catholic Church and the scandals with
Yep.
the molesting of the children. This is just something with which people cannot abide. And it's not like it's the only scandal that the Catholic Church has been involved in over the years. So, and other churches have their own scandals. I get it, whatever, but that's the
Yeah.
tradition that I had to choose whether I wanted to stay part of the organization or run free. Your thoughts about the responsibility of the organization itself, and why is that why people are leaving?
I think it is. I think conservative religion wants an authoritarian, wants control figures, wants people in power to have sort of dominion over them. And a progressive spirituality resists that. And that's why, someone said to me, why don't we have Franklin Graham's on the left? Well, we don't want that kind of power holding. We want something that is of the people, that is dispersed. And that's really difficult to create that, have a system for that. But all religious organizations are going to have corruption the more power that people are given. And so we really have to do the really true work of spirituality in our local communities, I think. I'm always telling people, read what I write and then figure out what that looks like where you are on the ground, because that thing can stay uncorrupted.
On your Twitter bio, you say, love your neighbor, get vaccinated. This is about more than you. Can you give us some other examples of where people are kind of getting it wrong?
Hmm. I think over the past 3 or 4 years, we have seen. I remember starting to write this book, and I was looking at what was happening with the pandemic and the people who were resisting masks and later vaccines, and then looking at the protest over the killings of unarmed Black people, and the counter protests were coming from professed Christians, and then all this anti-immigrant rhetoric, and over, I was seeing all the discord and vitriol seem to be coming from largely white people professing to be followers of Jesus. And that, to me, is the greatest disgrace of our lifetimes, that people have so twisted that message that was just so pure and beautiful and others based. And so that's the work I do, is trying to call people back to the heart of what it means to love your neighbor and to love the least.
So when it comes to getting the vaccine, the idea here is, okay, you may be skeptical for whatever reason, but hundreds of thousands of other Americans are out there getting it, and they haven't dropped dead yet or been microchipped or whatever they are
That's
concerned
right.
with.
Yes.
Maybe now you could say, like, give up a little bit of your selfishness, of your self-concern, for concern for the other and concern for the group. It's a little odd. I talked in the segment before this about the military, and people, they go mostly because they think they're being of service, and they will put their bodies on the line for that. And yet,
Yeah.
and a lot of the people who are concerned about vaccines or won't get vaccinated, or just basically conservatives. I mean, there are liberals who aren't getting vaccinated also, but a lot of the conservatives, they support the military. They love the military. They want to do
Yes.
the military, and you're putting your body on the line. But when it comes time for them to maybe do something that they think is, scary or whatever, they just don't do it. And then they yell for personal freedom.
Well, and also you see in a lot of these people, it's really not about fear or skepticism of those things. It's about tribalism, because to get vaccinated, somehow they twisted that as some sort of defeat to the left. And that's what I think Trump has done. He has made these expressions of our common good, he has made them somehow character flaws. And so it's not about necessarily about the safety, because the data shows that it's safe. It's really about, I don't want to have a win for the progressives or for Biden. And that's, again, having your morality and your politics is so toxic, so entwined that way.
Do you think that Trump is evil?
Uh, I'd say, as close as the definition as we have, I would say he is completely without working morality. he seems to be able to just take on them. The Christian right, Donald Trump doesn't have a religious, impulse at all, and a moral impulse, an impulse for kindness. I think the religious right said, we'll use him just as much as he's going to use us. So we'll place our morality and work that through him. I think Donald Trump is someone who's completely devoid of empathy.
How do people not see that? I mean, as a pastor, you work with groups of people who are professing, who are trying to whatever get closer to their
Yeah.
self, their God, their whatever. How have you like put on an outfit and gone into one of these evangelical churches where they're preaching a lot of hate and just trying to get a sense of like how is this happening?
Yeah, I wanted to do like an undercover liberal and just go into all these churches, but I do talk to these people a lot, and I came out of churches where I understand there's a story that they tell themselves, and that story is historically Christian and Republican are the same thing, American and Christian are the same thing, and so they will do anything to have that story be true. So they know Donald Trump. They may have thought, well, I'll just make this uneasy alliance, but what they've had to do now is over and over double down on him. And there's a certain point where you lose your moral compass, where you have no working morality to stand on any longer. And that's the sad part. It's really now about people who refuse to admit they were mistaken. And at the core of it, that's what it is. And what a horrible thing to have to put people through just to avoid saying, hey, I was wrong.
If they said they were wrong, we'd be like, oh, thank God. There was a
Yeah.
relief for folks to just say, oh, good. Oh, I don't
Yeah.
know. I know because I'm a therapist by trade that children who are brought up with trauma, which is like everyone on the planet, it's traumatizing just to live here,
Yes.
can often feel like they cannot say they were wrong because in their minds, it has become attached to the fear of violence and the fear of retribution, which also is in, the fear
Yeah.
of going to hell. All of that lines up. So this admitting that you're wrong is not it's not a possible. It's almost like it's stuck. Their brains just won't allow it.
Yeah, and two things on that are really important. We have something like Fox News, and we have the religious, pastors, the religious churches leveraging this fear over and over again. And when people are terrified, they're not at their best. And we see tens of millions of people who are in this state of constant urgency because the people around them have created that. And the other thing is that when you begin to deviate, you risk losing your community, your religious community, and that's really a powerful attraction. And people will do almost anything to stay in that community, and that's where the toxic tribalism comes.
Oh God, that's so sad. Your new book, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, is on shelves. Here's the cover. So when you go looking, you will see it. Talk about why you decided to write this book at this time.
Well, as I was saying, I started writing this in January of 2020, and it was a little bit different book, some of the same themes, but it was a very different take on it. And as everything started to unfold in 2020 and realizing how much anger and discrimination and exclusion seemed to be coming from professed Christians, I just felt a responsibility to speak into the very unique circumstances of that time. And it became like a journal about all this that was happening, but viewed through the lens of my progressive faith. And so I just felt like it was time. Certain things could not be talked around. They had to be explicitly stated.
Yes, and I love the title of your blog. Oh, tell me what it is again. I had it written down in here.
It's stuff that needs to be said.
Yeah, stuff that needs to be said. So perfect. So absolutely perfect. Did you think that the right was going to listen to the admonitions of the book, or was the impetus to really get the left or center to say, to just feel heard or feel supported, that they weren't alone in their opinions?
Well, I'm an honest person. I'm connected to reality, so that I know there are not a lot of conservative Christians who are going to openly read this. But my hope is that I can reach the people that they live with, or the people that they go to church with, or that they're friends with.
Yeah.
And I hope that it permeates. And really, a lot of the, I try to state in the book, I'm not just diagnosing this toxic thing and saying, look what a bunch of jerks you are. I'm copping to my own fraudulence and inconsistency and hypocrisy. And I hope that some conservatives do find it approachable, because the heart of this is that I don't see them as the enemy. They may be the obstacle to diversity and to justice, but they're not the enemy, because I want all these things for them as well. I want clean air for their children. I want universal health care for their families. And so I'm not fighting with them, I'm fighting for them. And I hope that some people will see that.
There's a tricky dynamic going on in the world right now where it is very scary to see what the right is doing. Um, it's scary, and then people become scared. And then there is a possibility that when, as you said, when you're scared, you're not acting out of your best self. So there have been studies done when people are frightened, they look for a strong man or woman. They look for their mom. They look for a
Yeah.
leader. It's like right in the genes, like, oh, something terrible. Where's the parent? So it's, I mean, what you said about Donald Trump being evil. And then I've always thought that he unleashed and gave permission this like flow of evil that's just been going everywhere.
That's
And
right.
I loved what you said about the moral compass just being fried, or, how do we stop ourselves from being fearful of things that are actually quite frightening? I mean, you've got swastikas marching down the street. You've got Trump flags driving past and menacing. You have got people shooting people's children in the front yard for jogging. This is, it's scary.
Yeah, it's not frivolous and it's not unfounded. I think it's about right sizing the fears and then responding in a way that's actually productive. So, social media is wonderful and for certain things, but what it does is it artificially inflates the bad news, I think. And so what we have to do is keep reading the news and keep absorbing all the information, but then translating into, okay, so what's my response? What's a productive response? What's a healthy response? What in my community is going to combat whatever it is that burdens me? And again, you see these neo-Nazis visible, well, then people opposing them, we have to be as visible. There is no other option. This is our place and time in the history of the planet. And I firmly believe we're here to be the opposition to all that as loudly and clearly as we can.
Well, I hope we're doing that right here at act.tv. You're reminding me of some little thing that I have to go do, which is they're trying to take the mask mandates out of schools. And, the people who are showing up at the school boards are the angry ones who are getting on the internet, and no one wants to go there and be in that space, but you kind of have to, and say, well, until XYZ happens, we would prefer if the mask mandates stay in place. And there is actually more of us than there are of them.
Yes.
Just, they are so loud.
And that's the key. I had two friends who went to one of the school board meetings and they were surrounded by all these people. And yet there were so many people that they knew, these two people knew, who were just online lamenting how terrible it is, or they're with their friends, rather than showing up and being a visible pushback to that. And that's true. The numbers are that we are the majority, and we are just not wielding that well enough. We are not being, we're still in that sort of paralyzed response, waiting for someone to rescue us. And we are the rescuers. I mean, we're the ones who are going to be doing that.
I have compassion for people who've been propagandized and whose minds have been turned against them. That's how I kind of look at what's going on there. Because if it's not for a great spiritual sickness, they wouldn't be in that position. That's how I look at it. That's what, and I live in a red area. I'm a blue girl in a red area. I find that the people who would otherwise be screaming in my face at the school board meeting, if they run into me at the grocery store and I drop my can of beans, will pick them up and hand them to me. So I feel like it's a weird life, it's a weird dynamic. It's like interpersonally, I have found great generosity of spirit, and it's just it explodes your mind, and then they don't John,
Well,
go
and
ahead.
real quick, and I've had those conversations where someone will say, "Well, this person in my neighborhood, they're so nice," and they are nice. They are nice people to you, and they have a story that they tell themselves about their own goodness and kindness, and so that's true. And so people are nice to me, but I know if I were a person of color who were pulled over on the side of the road, or if I were an immigrant, or I were a gay teenager, they would treat me differently, or at least the legislation they support would affect me adversely.
Mm.
And so I know they're nice to me. I just also know that their values are antithetical to many of mine. So I have to balance loving them and relating to them interpersonally, and yet fighting the systemic ills that they're responsible for.
Mm. Well, do you have any suggestions for our audience about how we fight back against the machine?
This is going to be fought in the small and close. I mean, the big and distant stuff is going to get taken care of down the line, but it's really about the communities we live in, the places that we know, and the people that we are friends with. We have to build things right where we are, and those ripples, those combined ripples, are what's going to do this work. So it is overwhelming to look at all that stuff out there. So don't worry about the out there yet. Worry about the right here, right now, small, close, and doable.
Oh, it's so great to have you on the program. I really appreciate you being here with us. We're speaking with John Pavlovitz. Go to John Pavlovitz. It's POV. You can see it right under here. POVLOVITZ.com. You can get the information about the book. You can get the blog posts and all that good stuff. Final words for people who are coming to this video because they saw the title, What Happened to the Progressive Left? On where they might want to plug back in.
I think you start in your community doing just productive things. So there's a group here in Raleigh, for example, called Activate Good, and they're a volunteer hub. And I'll show up at places like that and then begin building relationships with people and find out that they may be spiritual, and then maybe we're building a community. But it's really about getting out into the world where people are doing good work, and you're going to find your tribe of affinity, which may be in a church and it may not. But I think we've just got to make our presence felt. People who believe that empathy is the better path, we have got to be out there doing the work. That's it.
John, okay, I told you I could keep you here for 2 hours, which I am going to do, unless you're like, I got to go. So
Oh, that's good.
act.tv came out of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if you went to the park or went to any of the parks all across the country where people
Right.
were.
Yeah.
But at Zuccotti Park, I talk about this a lot on the show. There was this feeling of oneness. It was palpable. There was this energy of oneness. There was also and then when the police came with their batons, you could really see the difference between that energy and the sort of energy of love and oneness. It seems to me like, in a greater sense, it's that energy of love and oneness that, like, authoritarianism is always trying to club down into some bloody mass and on the ground, that kind of thing. It seems like the fight is biblical. I don't know. I never read the Bible. But it's certain, and I don't want to be like on the internet saying the end is near. I mean, although with climate change, the end very well may be near, but it does seem like it is this fight between the powers that would have us stay separated,
Yes.
and the power of oneness.
Absolutely. And if you look even at the Christian faith, it's the idea that God so loved the world, not that God loved America or God loved white people. And the truth is, the heart of all best faith traditions are this interdependent community that we're all part of, which is fascinating to me doing this work, because I've been invited to speak by Muslim groups and synagogues and humanist conferences and progressive faith communities. I'm rarely invited by a conservative Christian church. And that's, I think, because they're terrified that their story can't stand up to scrutiny. And their story is adversarial. They have a faith that needs an enemy. They always need to otherize someone in order to validate their faith. But oneness, interdependence, that is what the majority of people who are spiritual believe in, I think.
And it's like they're conning their flocks, because, as you said before, the people are so afraid to see what might be right in front of them, because they might lose their community, their sense of oneness there. But that's not really a sense of oneness. That's not
No,
interdependence.
and I was released from that. I was my church years ago, and I was pushing back against some of the things in the church, and was eventually fired from the church for that. I was actually released to express this more fully because I was always having to couch my language, and it was always about preserving the institution. And I had to believe that Muslims were somehow dangerous, or that LGBTQ people had some agenda that was going to destroy the church. And once I was able to give up those ridiculous facades, those fights, then you can embrace diverse humanity without any reservation. And it's so much the better path.
Let's start a hashtag, take back Jesus, because, it's like they took Jesus from me on some level.
That's the work that that is the hardest to do, because for so many people that you're speaking about, the religious left, they almost can't identify as Christian anymore because of what that word now associates them with. And
it's like the
it's
flag.
a really,
if I put the flag out, my neighbors are going to be like, what happened?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it does lead to like a sense of homelessness, and people feel spiritually orphaned. And that's why the religious left is not as visible, because people are still trying to figure out, where do I belong and how do I fit in now that I have belief, but I can't be a part of that thing that I used to be part of.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm living that life. Although I jumped out at 7 when the priest told me that cats do not go to heaven. And I was like, you are wrong. This whole thing is a bullshit. And I was out of there.
I've met a couple that I'm sure aren't there, but that's another.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure.
No, but and I grew up Roman Catholic too, and what I had to outgrow or pull away from was the idea of the guilt and the fear, and a God who was always out to squash you. And when you look at the Christian right, that's a lot of this too. People are ultimately terrified of a God who doesn't want them to get it wrong, and that's what a sad thing.
Another reason why they can't admit that maybe they'd been wrong.
That's right. And because they also feel, I'm arguing with other people's God, because I can remember thinking, I don't know people's lives, like LGBTQ people that I began to meet. Life began to argue with my theology. And it was difficult because I said, do I lean into these people that I'm meeting who are telling me a different story that I was raised in? And I had to decide what I was going to choose. And ultimately I chose to be someone who learned and grew, rather than staying in that safe religious thing. But a lot of people can't do that.
Well, that's very free thinking of you. And religion, which usually starts for people with the mother's milk, doesn't really encourage free thinking. Now, does it?
Well, what it does is it prizes certainty, and certainty becomes the thing that you worship. It's not about necessarily. It's not necessarily about what you believe. It's you saying, I believe this. And so many of the people we're talking about, if you actually show them the teachings of Jesus or the Bible, they haven't really read it. They say they love the Bible, but they haven't really read it to the point where they want to embody the compassionate heart of Jesus. They just want to be able to weaponize it. And so that's the sad part.
That is, and the work that you're doing is incredibly valuable, useful, and necessary. I'm very blessed and graced that you would come on our program to have this conversation. The new book, again, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. There's a lot in this book that I'm not going to have a chance to talk to you about, because even if you could stay for 4 hours, we have to get off. But maybe you'll come back and have further discussions with us. I hope you will.
I would be honored. Thank you so much. Yeah, anytime. Would love it.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back. You're watching Act TV. Did you like the show? If you're listening closely to this program, you're seeing where we're going. We're trying to embrace a little bit more of the power that comes with the secret spirituality that many lefties can't profess. It's like we can't talk about that. Forget about it. Anyway, more on that in a bit. You're watching Act TV. I will see you on Tuesday when I have some fun headlines I'm doing with Katie Halper from the Katie Halper Show. And she is also the co-host of Useful Idiots with Matt Taibbi on the internets. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching.